Welcome to another video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at vehicles. I'm going to explain how to create a vehicle using the voxel editor and the map editor. We'll then take a look at refining the vehicle's movement area using terrain types so that we can refine where a vehicle can and cannot move around your map. And then at the very end, I'm going to briefly explain how I set up the following scenario. So in this scenario, if I get into this minecart, if I move down the track, I reach this piece of track, but I can't go any further because this piece is rotated the wrong way. So if I get out of the minecart, flip this switch, the track turns, I can get back into the cart, and now I can progress further to the other side. So at the end of the video, I'll explain how I was able to create this scenario, and we'll recreate this at the end of the video. But for now, let's start with taking a look at how to create a vehicle. Now, I'm not going to show in this video how to actually make a vehicle. I'll assume you know enough about the voxel editor to make a vehicle or import one from elsewhere. For this, I'm going to use this vehicle here to start with. This is, if you want to know where you can get this from, this is actually from Magica Voxel. If you download Magica Voxel, which is a free voxel modeling piece of software, it actually comes with some sort of projects built in, one of which has this vehicle as part of its pre-packaged projects. So I just exported it from Magica Voxel and imported it into RPG in a Box, if you want to know where it comes from. So, first of all, though, let's talk about what do you need in a model in order to make a vehicle. First of all, you need a couple of preset animation names, predefined animation names. So what we'll do is we'll click here where it says add animation, and you can either type it in by hand or you can click the magnifying glass, and this will show you the list of predefined animation names for the type of entity you're modeling. So if it's a character, this will be a different set of names. If it's an object or a tile, then you'll have a different set of names in this list as well. For a vehicle, what you need is default. This is the sort of idle, and this would be the equivalent to an idle animation on a character model. Okay, so we're going to need a default animation name. But then what we're also going to need is a move animation. Now, a vehicle may work without these, but obviously if you want your vehicle to sort of act like it's moving and you want to have animation, then these are the names you'll need to use, because then these will just work without having to script them to work or anything. At the moment your vehicle starts to move, it will play the animation with the name move. Now, if we take a look at the ship, which comes with the example game in RPG in a Box, you can see that there's actually a third animation name, in this case default player, which if we play that, you can see it's just a variation of the default animation, but with the player model seemingly inside the vehicle. This is an entirely optional animation. You do not have to have this, especially if, for example, the car, let's go back to the car for a second. If you can't see into the vehicle, then it's easier just to have the sort of player turn into the vehicle, if you know what I mean. There's no reason to sort of show the player in the car, but you can if you want to. And if you want to do that, then you'll have a third animation, which will be a variation of the default that has the player sitting in the car. Okay. Now you can call this anything you want, unlike default and move, which have to be named specifically those things in order for the vehicle to use the right animations. Default player, in this case, this could be called anything you want. So in our case, we will use a custom default in a second, but I'm actually going to call it something different. So you can call it anything you want. So those are the animation names that you need in order for a vehicle to work. Now let's talk about let's make this vehicle a little bit more interesting in regards to using it as a vehicle. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make a copy of this frame. So I'm going to click the duplicate frame button. So now this vehicle model has 2 frames. And I'm going to go back to the first frame, which is I'm going to use as the default animation. And I'm going to change the colors on these lights. I'm going to dim the color on these lights so they look like the lights are off. And I'm going to do the same with these headlights. I'm going to dim them so it looks like, the car is currently turned off. And then when you get into the vehicle, we'll have the lights turn on. The headlights can turn on, as can the reverse brake lights. What we'll also do is we will add, just for extra aesthetics, let's add in a light source, okay? And we will just quickly move that forwards towards the front of the car, move it down just a little bit so it's in line with the lights, and then we'll change the light from being a omnidirectional light to a spotlight, and we'll rotate it round so that we can see the light. So 180 if we can get. Okay, well, that's close enough. And then what we'll do is we'll angle it down a little bit. And we will just amend the brightness. We'll exaggerate it a bit because the map we're going to be testing this on is daylight. But obviously if you wanted to have the vehicle drive at night, you might want to dim the lights slightly. But anyway, we'll have them like that so that we can at least somewhat see the lights in game. And then what we're going to want to do is tick the animated box, which I'm not sure whether I accidentally ticked it or not, because normally it's not ticked. But if we tick the animated box, then that will allow us to animate the spot the light source as we go through the frames. So when we're in frame 1, we want the energy level of the light to be 0. So in essence, the light is off. And then as soon as we get into the vehicle, we'll have the lights turn on. Okay. So now let's talk about how we animate a moving vehicle. In this case, we've got a car. So there's 2 ways we could go about this. The simple way and the advanced way. I'll show the simple way first very quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this frame 3 more times, I think. Or maybe, well, yeah, I think 3 more times. So 1, 2, 3. So I'll have 5 frames in total. Just make sure that the light is working. I noticed that every time I duplicate a light source, it doesn't seem to carry the light over. It seems to mess the light source up. So let me just fix that by going back to frame 6 or 5 even, grabbing the brightness, copy that value, and then we'll just go back through pasting it into the other frames. Okay, so the simple way of animating a vehicle moving is to give the illusion that the wheels are turning. So one way we can do that is to use a slightly different colored voxel. So what we'll do is we'll select perhaps a slight shade difference of voxel here, and we'll color in a single cube in the top corner of these tires, like that, of the wheels, like that. And then in the next frame along, we will then put the cube, the voxel, on the next line across. And then on frame 4, we'll then put the cube down here. And then in final frame, we'll put the cube here. So you can see that the illusion is created there that grey cube is sort of going in a circle. It's going round that wheel. Okay, so now if we go to the model properties and we create, or we select our move animation, and we say frames 2 to 5 loop. Now if we play that, you can see that it gives the effect of the wheels turning. Okay, so that's the simple way of doing it. Let's stop that. The other thing I want to do is quickly make my custom default animation. So I'll just call this in vehicle, and this is going to be frame 2 to frame 2. So this is just us when we're in the vehicle, but we're not driving anywhere. So the lights should be on, but the vehicle is stationary. Okay. The other thing we need to do is go back to the default animation, the default frame, and add those grey cubes in so we have consistency. So even when we're out of the vehicle, you should still be able to see those spinning grey voxels. So that's the easy way of kind of giving the illusion that the wheels are turning, is if you have a reference point, a reference voxel that sort of looks like it's moving around. The advanced way that we could do this is if I just quickly save the vehicle so we can go to another example. This version uses attach points. So what I've done is I've taken the wheels away from this model and put them into a separate model called wheel, given them attach points, and I've put attach points where the wheels would be, and then I've attached the wheels to those attach points. And then my move animation just rotates the attach point 18 degrees per frame to a maximum of 90, and then it's on a loop. So if we play, you kind of get the idea of the wheels turning. And you can obviously amend the speed of your move animation if you think it's going too slowly. Yeah, you have to match obviously the rate at which the wheels spin to the speed of the move of the vehicle. Otherwise the illusion doesn't work quite so well. But anyway, that's one way. Another way that you could create a vehicle, for example, is to actually animate the wheels via an attach point. For the purposes of this video though, I'm going to stick to the simple one. So this should now be fully set up. So let's make sure the model is saved, and let's now go to the map editor. So I have here a simple map that I've set up. It's got a couple of types of terrain. It's got grass, it's got a road, and then it's got an ocean. And most of the map is fully nav meshed up. You can see all the lines everywhere. Okay. So let's start by adding in our newly created vehicle into our map. Let's rotate the vehicle and place it. Now, two important things to know that I forgot to mention, so let me quickly mention them now. Vehicles need to be objects. So when you create a voxel model from scratch for your vehicle, it needs to be an object, not a character or a tile. Okay, so make sure it's an object. But also the other thing to bear in mind is when you're making your vehicle, let's just open it again in the voxel editor, be mindful of the orientation of the camera of these positions when you're making your model. So here we have front, back, left, and right. Okay, these are important to consider when making your vehicle because they will impact the exit positions of your vehicle, and they will also affect where you can and can't get into your vehicle. Okay, as of filming this video, there's a bit of an issue when you have vehicles that are bigger than the size of your map grid. Okay, And we'll talk a little bit about that because this is exactly what's going to happen with this vehicle. So as it comes up, I will point it out. So the issue we've got here is this map is a 16 by 16 tile map, but this vehicle is a 32 by 32. So you can already see it's kind of much bigger than its surroundings in a way. So already what I'm going to do is select the vehicle now I've placed it and just slightly amend its scale to 0.7 just so it fits a little bit better into its surroundings. Now, when we placed the vehicle, it also deleted the nav mesh around it. We're going to need the nav mesh. So I'm just going to momentarily select the vehicle and add it to a group called car, just so I can then hide the group. That will just allow me to completely get to the road and the surroundings without having to go underneath the car and all of that. And then bring the car back and delete the group. So we've now placed our model that we've just been making, and it's an object, and we've scaled it down. So now let's talk about how to turn an object that you've just placed into the map editor into a vehicle. So what you do is you select it and you scroll down to where the vehicle option is, and we're going to turn this on. And this will then present a handful of options. So let's go through these. The first option is the speed of the vehicle. Now, by default, the player model moves at a speed of 30. So currently, this vehicle is no faster than the player can walk. So we wouldn't notice any major speed boost currently if we got into this vehicle. Obviously, you've got a couple of choices. You could either slow the player's movement down, or we could increase the speed of the vehicle. It's up to you which one you do, which one feels realistic. Let's just speed the vehicle up just a little bit by making that 50. The next option we have is terrain types. Now we'll come back to terrain types. I'll cover those once we've got the vehicle set up and working. We'll just go through the very simple options first, and then we'll come back to things like terrain types. The next couple of options we have are the embark and disembark scripts. These are for things that you wish to have happen when you either get into a vehicle or get out of a vehicle. So you would write a script for things that should happen, for example, when you get out of a vehicle, and then you would assign that script to the disembark script event. Okay, we're actually going to make a couple of scripts for that event. So give me a second just to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new script called in car. And all this script is going to simply do is override animation. And we're going to set this to self, because this script is going to be on the vehicle. So self will be a reference to the vehicle. We want to override the default animation with the one that I made by custom, which is in vehicle. So that's the one I made in the voxel editor, which is just frame 2. Okay, so that now means that when I get into the vehicle, the default animation instead is going to be this one. And then we will make another script quickly. So we'll do save as, and we'll save this as out car, and then we'll say put default back to default. So when we get out of the car, the default animation will go back to being the default animation. And then we'll just assign those scripts to our vehicle. So embark script should be in car, disembark script should be out car. Okay. And then the next option we have is the exit options priority. So these basically govern which sides of the vehicle you get out of when you exit the vehicle. So currently, the front side is at the top of the list. Okay, there are 5 options in this list: front side, left side, right side, back side, and current position. Okay, we'll go over most of these. Most of these should be self-explanatory. But basically, the way it works is whichever is at the top of the list, in this case, the front side, that's going to be given priority. So as long as the front tile in front of a vehicle is vacant and able to support the player, then when they exit the vehicle, that's where they will always stand, okay? However, if the front was blocked, and therefore the player couldn't stand on this tile, then it will fall back to whichever is the next down in the list. So in this case, the left side. So if there was an obstacle here in front of the vehicle and I tried to get out, I would appear here on the left-hand side, okay? So you would reorganize these by clicking the green arrows up and down to change the priority. So if we wanted to prioritize, for example, the sides, we could put the left and the right above the front and the back, okay? It is also possible to remove sides. So let's say we just don't want the player to ever appear at the back. So we can just delete that. And now, basically, the player will never appear behind the vehicle. Even if all the other exits are blocked, because we haven't given them that option, they then therefore can't use it. So if all the other exits are blocked, then you just will be stuck in the car, okay? Now, current position will probably require me to show you what this does, but basically, current position will basically put you at the current position of the vehicle. So front would put you here, backside would put you here, left will put you here, right would put you here, but the current position will put you on this tile there. So the player will currently be standing in the vehicle as if they've clipped through the vehicle. Okay, so that's what current position does. It puts the player standing exactly where the vehicle is, but they're just not in it anymore. Okay, so it's unlikely that you'll ever use current position much, but obviously it's a good fail-safe if all the other exits are blocked. But you could also just take it out and not have it as a possible exit option. So I'm actually going to restrict this vehicle to the left, the right, and if failing that, the front. Okay. So let's save that, and that's our vehicle effectively done. It's as simple as that. So let's give this a test. So here we are in the game. So if I click on the vehicle, you'll notice that I walk towards it, but I don't get into it. Okay. That is currently an issue that we have with 32 by 32 vehicles on a 16 by 16 grid. This is what I was referring to earlier. However, if I can get into the vehicle, if I move towards the back and then click on the vehicle, because that's the part of the vehicle that will support getting into the vehicle on a 16 by 16 grid if you've got a 32 by 32 vehicle, okay? So we can now move the vehicle back and forth. You can see the lights have come on now that I'm in the vehicle. As soon as I press X, I should appear to the left of the vehicle. That's the priority that I gave to the vehicle. So there I am, standing to the left. Notice how the lights of the vehicle are off, including the headlights. If I get back into the vehicle, the lights come on, both visually, but also you can see the spotlights come on. Again, it's quite a bright map, so we can't see the headlights that much, but you can see that they're at least there. So if I get out of the vehicle, these lights should come off. You can see they dim. Get back in. So let's drive across the bridge, and you'll notice that now the front and the left and the right are now blocked. There's no way for the player to get out, either to the tile to the left or the tile to the right. So now when I get out of the vehicle, I'm in the front. I'm put in the front because that's the next prioritized available exit. Okay, so that's pretty much it for vehicles. Obviously, one thing to note is the X key is the keyboard shortcut for getting in and out of a vehicle. You can also use the control and arrow keys to get out of a vehicle. So control and up will put you at the back, even though we didn't give that exit as a viable exit, which is interesting. Control and left puts us on the left. Control and right puts us on the right. And in this case, control and down will be in front. So I'm not sure if control and the arrows are supposed to overwrite the exit priority thing, but just note that that can do that. But if we press X, it will use the priority list. So the only other thing we now need to set up with this vehicle is the fact that we can currently drive everywhere, including the water, which, you know, maybe a 4x4 like this probably could go in the water, but it's probably still a bit unrealistic. So what we probably want to do is restrict where this vehicle can go. So let's take a look at that now. Before I get on to the topic of terrain types, one last thing to mention about the importance of how you set up your vehicle in the voxel editor, okay? Notice how this vehicle has been set up so that when we're looking at the model from the front, okay, this is what we see. And if we switch the model to the left, that's what we see, and the back, that's what we see, okay? Now, if you'd set up the model so the front looked like that, and then the left looked like that, then in-game, when you set this model, where you set the vehicle to have the exit options of left and right, even though you've set this to prioritize the left, it will look like you've got out of the front, because the game will consider that to be the left. Does that make sense? If your model is not set up so that the front of the vehicle is actually the front of the vehicle in the voxel editor, then it will mess up these exit options. So be aware of that. Make sure your vehicle, when you're editing it in the voxel editor, that the front of the vehicle is assigned to the front of the vehicle. Yeah. So let's now talk about terrain types. So what we want to do is, I'm going to demonstrate this with the water. So we're going to place another vehicle. We'll place the ship from the example game. Let's place that there. We'll turn this into a vehicle. So we'll go down to vehicle, turn that on. We'll set the speed to 50. Well, it's a boat, so let's make it a bit slower, in fact. And we're not going to bother with an disembark script. We're not going to exit from the front because I don't think that's, well, it might be possible. I'm going to remove the current position because it's going to be impossible for the player to leave on the water, okay? So what we want to do is we want to think about where this vehicle should and shouldn't be able to go. Well, as it's a boat, it probably shouldn't be able to go on land, right? So we want to restrict the boat to this area. Obviously, it could move around that area, but there's a bridge in the way, so there's no real way for it to get there. So for now, we'll restrict it to this body of water here. What we probably also want to do is make it so the player can't walk on the water, okay? So to do that, we need to edit the water tile in the voxel editor. So find your tile that you wish to restrict the player from and restrict the vehicle to in your list and open it in the voxel editor. So I'm going to open the water in the voxel editor. And when you've got the model open, you want to find the terrain type option and click the pencil button and click add, and you're going to make your own custom terrain type. For this, I'm going to call this ocean and click OK, and then click OK. So I've now given this tile the terrain type of ocean. And if we save that, that now means that everywhere, every instance of this tile on the map has that terrain type. So all of these tiles now are considered ocean terrain type. Okay. So what we want to do now is select our boat and go to the terrain types option and drop this down. You'll see there's 3 options. First one, the default one, is all. That basically means this vehicle can go everywhere. It basically ignores that terrain type setting that we just set up in the voxel editor. It will just go everywhere there's a navigation line. Okay. Prohibited from is a way of telling an entity specific tiles where it cannot go. So this is going to be useful for the player, but not for the vehicle. Restricted to is a way of telling an entity where the only tiles it can go on. So this is what we want in this case. So prohibited from is where we specify which tiles something cannot enter, and restricted to is where we say you can only move on these tiles. Okay, so in the case of the boat, we want restricted to ocean and click OK. You can select more than one by holding down Control and then left clicking if you want to have it support multiple terrain types. But for this, we just want the one, ocean, and click OK. So now that means this vehicle is restricted to the ocean. It can only move on tiles that have that terrain type. So think about terrain types a bit like tags. So when you give something a tag, terrain types is kind of like the tag for the terrain. Yeah. So this will now specify that this vehicle can only move around on tiles with that terrain type. So it won't be able to go on the land because I haven't put that terrain type on the land. However, if I was to go into the voxel editor and put ocean as a terrain type onto the grass, then the boat would be able to go up on the grass as well. What we want to do as well is go into the player model properties in the voxel editor, find the terrain types, set this to prohibited from, because we only want to specify there's only one type of tile the player cannot walk on. So for that we need prohibited from, and we'll select ocean. And now that means the player can walk anywhere but the ocean. Okay. So now if we save and test the game, if we get into the boat, we can move around on the boat. If we try and move the boat up onto dry land, we can't. It won't go up there, but we can carry on moving. We can move towards the bridge, but we can't go through it. And if I get out of the vehicle, if I move the boat to where there isn't dry land and I try and get out of the vehicle, I can't, because the player, there is no tile anywhere remotely close to the vehicle that has a terrain type that the player isn't prohibited from. In other words, he's prohibited from the water, so there's no way he can get out of the vehicle while surrounded by water. However, there is now a tile to the left of this vehicle, or right, whichever one you would call it. To the side of this vehicle, there's now a tile with terrain type that he isn't prohibited from. So if I press X, the player will now exit the vehicle. Okay. So, and if we try and walk into the water, we can't, because again, the player is prohibited from that particular terrain type. So you'll see this again in action when we get to the minecart demonstration, which we'll get to in a second. But there's one last thing I want to demonstrate before we get into closing out with the final example, which is that it's also possible to script the entering and exiting of vehicles. If you wish to, have moments in your game where you want to script a moment where the player gets into a particular vehicle rather than clicking on it, you can also use a couple of scripting commands to do that as well. So normally you would put these in a script, but for now I'm just going to bring down the console and demonstrate the two commands here. So if I hover my mouse over this Jeep, I can use self to now reference this Jeep. So the first command is enter _ vehicle, open and close parentheses. And then within the parentheses, you would type the ID of the vehicle that you wish the player to enter with this command. So if we pass in self, that will now be a reference to the Jeep. So if we now press enter, the player is now in the Jeep. So if I bring down to close the console, you can see I'm now in the Jeep. I can move back and forth. Okay, bring down the console again. So that's the first command, is enter vehicle. And the only parameter it takes, well, no, there's two parameters it takes. The first parameter though is the vehicle, and then the second parameter is the character that you wish to put into that vehicle. Normally it would be the player. So normally you would just pass in one parameter, which is the vehicle. And then the other command that you can use is exit vehicle, open and close parentheses. Now, usually you don't need to pass anything in because you can only really exit a vehicle as long as you're already in one. And you can just press enter because it will just exit you from the vehicle that you're in. Okay. But there are a couple of options you can pass into that, one of which is the tile that you'll be standing on when you exit the vehicle. If you wish to, have a play, if you wanted the player to stand over there, for example, when they exit the vehicle, you can pass in the tile coordinates as, I think it's the second parameter, And then the first parameter is possibly the vehicle. I'm not sure. It's in the documentation, okay? But I just thought I'd quickly show these commands here as well. And this can obviously apply to the boat as well. And it should be pointed out that you don't have to be anywhere remotely close to the vehicle. If I stand just over here and put the mouse over the boat and I enter vehicle self, we just teleport over to the boat. So obviously if you wanted to script a scenario with a cutscene or something where you wanted the player to walk up to a car and get into it, for example, then you would use a move player command first to a tile that's next to the vehicle, and then you would make it so that once the player reaches that tile, then you would trigger your enter vehicle request. Otherwise, you'll just teleport from where you are into that vehicle, and then exit vehicle will then, again, exit the vehicle. So those are the two scripting commands you can use as well. So the last thing I wanted to do in this video is just to quickly demonstrate how I set up the scenario I showed at the very beginning with this minecart, because I thought you might be interested to know how you can script changing where vehicles can and can't go using terrain types during your game in scripts, because it is also possible to change the movement of vehicles and where they can and can't go mid-game. Okay, so this is an example that demonstrates that. So let's quickly walk through how to set this up. So what I have, first of all, is I have a minecart object, which I've given the entity ID cart1. I have this piece of track that's turned the wrong way currently, and it's got the ID turn_track. And I have this switch over here, which actually doesn't have an ID. I thought it did, but there's a switch there that's going to switch the track, okay? If we take a look at the cart object in the voxel editor, it has two frames, one which is just an empty minecart, and the other where I just copied and pasted the base Justin model into the cart, just so that it looks like the player is in the minecart. This is going to be used for the replacement default animation, but also when you're moving. So we have three animations in this model: default, driver, which is the replacement for the default, and move for when you're moving. Okay, and it's just a two-frame animation. Two-frame model. So default is frame 1 looping, and both move and driver are frame 2 looping. Okay, that's the minecart. Next we have the tracks. So I've got three types of track tile. I've got the track straight, track bend, and then this is what did I call it? Turntable, I think. Let's have a look. Track turn. Yeah, so this is like a turntable. So opening up track bend, what we need to do is add a terrain type to it. So I'm going to click the pencil and I'm going to add a terrain type called mine_track and click OK. So now this track bend has a terrain type mine_track. Save the model. I'm going to repeat that with track straight. This should have the same terrain type. So I'm going to click the pencil and click the pre-existing mine track. I don't need to create it again. Click OK. And now this tile has the same terrain type. But with track turn, the turntable, I'm actually going to give it a different terrain type. I'm going to click the pencil, click new, and I'm going to call this turntable. So that's the terrain type for this tile. So what that means is, in a minute when we go back to the map editor, if I select this cart, turn it into a vehicle, turn vehicle on, we'll leave the speed as it is, but I'm going to restrict it to mine track, and I'm not going to select turntable. So I'm going to leave just mine track as the selected terrain type, and it's restricted to. So I'm saying that this cart can only move on the terrain type mine track. So because this track turn track has a terrain type of turntable, it doesn't fit that criteria, which is why the minecart will not be able to progress past this point, or past this point if it's coming from this way, while that track is facing the wrong way. or currently at all, until we make it so that it's while it's facing that way. So that's the first thing done. We've done the terrain types. So that will make it so that we can't move currently past this point. Next, what I need to do is add a custom property to the minecart of Boolean. So I'm going to add that. I'm going to call this on board. And there's a couple of reasons why I'm doing this, but we'll start with that. So what I need to do now is create an embark script. So I'm just going to click save, go back to my script editor, and we'll create a new script, which I'll call mine_cart. And this script is actually going to go on both the disembark and the embark script events. So I'm going to start with a if statement that says if self.property on board, the one we just created on the cart, is false, then set self.property on board to true. But what we also want to do is override animation on self, which is the cart. We want to override the default animation with the driver animation. Otherwise, if onboard was already true, then we're going to do the opposite to these. So we're going to set the property to false and put the default animation back to the default animation. Okay, and end, apply and save. So that's our minecart script. And this is going to go on both the embark and disembark events on our vehicle. So embark script minecart, disembark script minecart. So you would select it from the list for both. Okay, that's because of the if statement. That means it can be used for both. Okay, so that now means that when we get into the vehicle, it will show the player in the cart, as well as setting the property. And then when we disembark the vehicle, it will put the model back to just being the cart on its own, with setting the property to false at the same time. Okay, so let's quickly test this and make sure it's all working up to this point. So here we are in the game. Let's get into the cart. So we can move the cart around, but we can't currently go past this point because this has a terrain type that the cart doesn't support. So now let's start to resolve how to fix that. So what we're going to do now is select the button, and the button has a property switch, which is false at the beginning of the game. We're going to use that, and we're going to go to the character interacts section and create a quick script on the button. And this is going to make it so we can switch the track, but also change the navigation, change the terrain type on the cart. So if entity cart1 dot property, is that right? No, sorry. If self dot property switch is false, then self dot property switch should then be switched to true. So we're switching it on. We should also switch the frame of the button to 2. I have 2 frames of the button, one that's off and one that's on. So we'll make it look like the button's been switched on. Then we want to reference entity, I think it's turn track. I will verify that in a second. Entity turn track, which is the tile here, dot direction equals north. So that will rotate it to fit the rest of the track. And then we want set terrain types. Now this is the important function I wanted to cover in this video, because it's the one that's relevant to vehicles. This is how we're going to be able to change during the running of our game which tiles the vehicle can and can't go down. Okay, So this takes three options. The first is the entity or the vehicle that you wish to affect the navigation. This could be a vehicle, it could be the player, or it could be an NPC. In this case, we want entity cart1. Okay. Then the second option is the terrain command, if you will. What are we saying with this? So I'm not sure what you call it, but the parameters are all, which basically means we could change it so that the minecart could now go everywhere across the entire map, which we obviously don't want. We could use prohibit from, and that would be the same as saying it can go everywhere but this tile. Or we could say restrict to, which is the one it's currently using. So this is what we want. We want restrict to. And then the third and final parameter is always an array. So type array and then open and close square brackets. And then inside the array, you use strings, and you're going to pass in the names that you typed of all the terrain types. So mine track is the one that the minecart should always be able to go on. But in this case, we're going to press comma and a space, and we're going to also add turn table. So what this now means is that we've now included the other terrain type into the vehicle's restricted to array. So that now means that when this bit of script is run, the vehicle can also move on this tile as well. Okay. And then we just need a flip side to that, which is if the switch is true, then we want to reverse all of this. So what we'll do is we'll copy paste that. The switch should now go to false because you're turning it off. The frame should go to 1, which is the off frame. Turn track direction should rotate again to be wrong. So let's say west. And then set the terrain type for the cart to just go back to only supporting the mine track. So again, it will not be able to go on this tile again if you flip the switch back. End. And that's our very simple, reasonably simple anyway, button that's going to rotate this tile, but also give us the ability to then move across that tile when done so. Yep, so that's the code if you want to take a quick look at it, see if you can grasp in essence what it's doing. But I have walked through it anyway. Click OK. Just going to check the ID on this. So ID is turn track. So let me just make sure. Yeah, turn track. So that should now work. So let's now give this a test. It should now work. So we get into the minecart. We start to go down. But we can't go any further because this tile is rotated the wrong way. So I'll get out of the cart, go and flick the switch. The switch goes green. If we flip it again, you can see the tile rotates. And click it again. It's rotated to face the right way. So if we get into the cart, we can now go through the tile and go past to the destination. So that is a quick example of how to do that scenario. So there you go. So that will wrap up this video on vehicles. Hope it was useful and informative, and I hope it's helped clarify how to set up vehicles and the various things you can do with them. If you have any questions on this topic, then feel free to post on the Discord. Myself and others will be happy to help. That will wrap up this video. Thanks for watching.